Medieval and early modern Europe could be a bad place to be accused of being a witch. The 16th and 17th centuries were high points in the European witch hunting craze. Across the continent, as many as 35,000 people, many of them, most of them women, were accused of witchcraft, were tortured, persecuted, and executed, usually by flame. In England, the sum was perhaps 500. Here in Wales, perhaps 5, though 3,000 or 4,000 women and men lost their lives in Scotland. And in Scotland they were burnt, but here in England and in Wales, witches were not burnt, they were hanged. Or at least most English witches were hanged. Some few poor unfortunate souls were burned. Not because of their witchcraft, but because of the crimes they had committed through felonious relationships with the devil, through their imps, familiars, and wicked magics. Principally, this was in killing their husbands, usually through poison. And this was enough to see them burnt for heresy. For a wife to kill her husband was a petty treason, and women found guilty of treason may be burned. Pretty grim stuff. Of the 500 or so people executed for witchcraft in England, over 100 of them, more than the 150, 160 years before he started his career, were found guilty and hanged of the work of Matthew Hopkins and his associate, John Stern. In Europe, many witches were forced to confess through torture and torment, but torture was illegal in England, and so Hopkins and Stern could not use it to secure a confession. And yet, many of their victims did confess. Because Hopkins and Stern could not use torture, they instead employed a method known as watching. The accused witch would be sat upon a stool and watched for any interactions with their familiar spirit, or for a confession to be forthcoming. They would be sat upon a stool, and if it looked like they would be falling asleep, they would be raised up and made to walk backwards and forwards. No food or drink would be given to them, because of course then someone would have to watch them use the privy. Very embarrassing for everybody. After some time, most of their accused witches confessed to their crime, not of necessarily using magic for evil, but of congress with familiar spirits. The Witchcraft Act of 1604 under James I, James VI of Scotland, who had been the author of the first big trials of witches in Scotland, well, that made congress with the devil, demons, imps, through either direct contact or through familiar spirits. Well, they made that sufficient proof to secure a conviction, a capital conviction. So, whilst it may seem that calling people a witch is but a harmless, almost jovial expression, once it had deadly significance. Somebody who used magic for good was a magician or a sorcerer, and they were fine. But witchcraft used for ill, or congress with a familiar, could lead to death, and did often do so. In England, 90% of those accused of witchcraft and found guilty were women, usually poor, socially disadvantaged, on the margins of a community, or in other cases, unmarried or widows who had a healthy amount of income, land, property, or other attributes that made them the envy of their neighbours within the parish. The accusations came from within communities, not usually from without. And so look to yourself and to those around you to see what exactly people are capable of.